Here's what unfolded yesterday, and it's crucial you understand it fully because once you grasp the consequences, it reveals everything about our current situation. On Monday, February 9th, 2026, former President Trump made a statement on Truth Social declaring that he would prevent the opening of a newly constructed $6 billion bridge linking the United States and Canada. This isn't a future project. The bridge is already complete after 8 years of construction, entirely funded by Canada. Trump insists that the U.S. must own at least half of this bridge and receive full reimbursement, or else he will block its opening. Multiple reputable news organizations, including the Associated Press, Bloomberg, Global News, and CBS Detroit, reported his exact words. "I will not allow this bridge to open until the United States is fully compensated for everything we have given them. Additionally, Canada must treat the United States with the fairness and respect we deserve." He further stated that negotiations would begin immediately, emphasizing that the U.S. possibly should own no less than 50% of this infrastructure. To understand what's at stake, here's some background on the bridge itself. Named the Gordie Howe International Bridge after a legendary Canadian hockey player with the Detroit Red Wings for 25 seasons, this structure connects Windsor, Ontario, and Detroit, Michigan. It spans 853 meters over the Detroit River and features 6 lanes for vehicles, alongside dedicated pedestrian and cycling pathways. Both ends include port of entry facilities linking to Interstate 75 in Michigan and Highway 401 in Ontario. A University of Windsor study cited by Yahoo News and Business Today highlights the bridge's economic significance. It will save commercial trucks approximately 850,000 hours annually, equating to about $2.3 billion in cost savings over 3 decades. Crucially, every credible news source covering the story confirms the Canadian government fully financed the project, with costs estimated between 5.7 and 6.4 billion Canadian dollars, roughly 4.5 billion in US terms. Construction began back in 2018, following an agreement brokered by then Michigan Governor Rick Snyder, a Republican. The bridge had been slated to open in early 2026, literally this month. Yet, despite all this, Trump's announcement means he intends to stop the bridge from becoming operational unless the United States receives half ownership and full compensation for what he claims the U.S. contributed. This naturally raises a fundamental question. What exactly has the U.S. given Canada that warrants full recompense? According to Trump's Truth Social statement and reporting from Global News and others, his grievance centers on a waiver granted by former President Obama. This waiver allowed Canada to bypass the Buy American Act, meaning Canadian firms were exempt from purchasing American steel or other American-made products for building this bridge on Canadian territory, despite Canada funding the entire construction. So to clarify, Canada utilized over $5 billion of its own funds to build a bridge that stands to benefit both nations enormously. Yet the current demand is for the United States to obtain full compensation and partial ownership for benefits Trump claims America provided. Trump's anger stems from the fact that Canada was permitted to construct this bridge without the requirement to purchase American steel. His current demand is that the United States must own half of the bridge and receive full compensation for everything it has supposedly given Canada. But what exactly has the U.S. given? Essentially, the permission for Canada to bypass the Buy American Act on this project, which Canada completely funded on its own. This is the compensation Trump insists on, redress for not mandating Canadian use of American products on a Canadian-financed endeavor. Now, to understand why this bridge exists, reports from Business Today and a University of Windsor study explain that the Windsor-Detroit corridor represents the busiest trade crossing between the two countries. The existing routes, the Ambassador Bridge and the Detroit-Windsor Tunnel, are notoriously congested. Michigan Democrat Senator Alyssa Slotkin, as quoted by the Associated Press and other sources, praised the bridge for enabling cargo to move seamlessly from Montreal down to Miami without ever stopping at a streetlight. She called it a significant boost for Michigan's economy. Michigan, American businesses, and U.S. trucking companies have all been eagerly awaiting this bridge, which would cut operational costs and improve efficiency dramatically. But despite Canada having built and completely financed the project, Trump now threatens to halt its opening unless the United States gains half ownership. That naturally leads to a second key question. How precisely would Trump block the opening of a bridge jointly owned by Canada and Michigan? According to the Associated Press and other media outlets, the method Trump could use to prevent the bridge's opening remains unclear. The White House did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Moreover, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer's press secretary clarified that the bridge falls under a joint ownership agreement between Michigan and Canada. That is, the state of Michigan and Canada are co-owners, not the federal government. So Trump is threatening to block a bridge that the federal government itself neither owns nor manages. This is a completed project on which construction is finished. It's a bridge Michigan urgently wants operational, and one fully paid for by Canada. Yet Trump's threat is issued via a social media post with no detailed explanation or legal grounds for how he would enforce it. At first glance, one might dismiss this as typical Trump rhetoric, bold threats that never materialize. But this situation is different, and here's why you need to pay attention. Bloomberg, CBS Detroit, Yahoo News, and many other outlets point out that Trump's threat comes amid increasingly strained relations between the United States and Canada during the U.S. president's second term. The USMCA trade agreement between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada is up for review this year, and Trump is adopting a hardline stance ahead of those negotiations, including proposing new tariffs. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has publicly denounced economic coercion by the United States, speaking recently at Davos about middle powers uniting to oppose weaponized economic integration. Just weeks after Carney's remarks, Trump threatens to block a bridge Canada financed and built unless Canada cedes half ownership. Connecting the dots, it becomes clear this is not really about the bridge itself. It is about political leverage. Trump believes that because the bridge crosses into U.S. territory, he can use the threat to block it as a bargaining chip, forcing Canada to make concessions on trade, tariffs, the USMCA negotiations, or other disputes. Essentially, he's holding a piece of Canadian-built infrastructure hostage for broader trade and political negotiations. Why does this matter? Senator Alyssa Slotkin's statement, as reported by the Associated Press, is key. You will be able to move cargo from Montreal to Miami without ever stopping at a streetlight. To threaten or stop this bridge is to damage U.S. interests. In other words, Trump is shooting himself and Michigan in the foot. Think carefully about that. A Democratic senator from Michigan, whose state desperately needs this bridge, is stating that threatening to block it means Trump is out of touch with what benefits the United States. Blocking the Gordie Howe Bridge does not penalize Canada more than it penalizes Michigan, American trucking firms, or U.S. businesses that rely on smooth cross-border trade. The harm would fall disproportionately on American interests. This corridor between Windsor and Detroit stands as the primary gateway for trade between Canada and the United States, according to both a University of Windsor study and numerous news reports. Yet, despite the immense importance of this route, former President Trump is now threatening to keep a new bridge designed to relieve congestion and generate billions in savings closed. His justification: he demands that Canada give the United States half ownership of a bridge Canada fully financed on its own. This act fits a broader pattern where longtime U.S. allies are revisiting and even recalibrating their relationships with the United States. For example, German investments in the U.S. have dropped by 45%. Canada has signed 12 new trade agreements in just 6 months. Canadian countertariffs against U.S. goods total $155 billion. The NDP in Canada has called for the cancellation of $19 billion in F-35 fighter jet purchases. At the recent Olympics, Vice President Harris was met with boos from 65,000 attendees. Now add to this troubling list the U.S. president threatening to block a bridge that Canada built and paid for, unless Canada hands over half ownership and compensates the U.S. for not enforcing American steel procurement on the project. Each of these incidents stems from the same root issue: American leadership increasingly treating allies as adversaries. The U.S. makes demands lacking legal or diplomatic precedent, relying on threats and coercive tactics rather than cooperation and dialogue. The consequence? Allies pull back, diversify their partnerships, and seek alternatives. Canada's perspective is clear. It invested $5 billion to construct a bridge benefiting both nations, yet Trump threatens to block it unless Canada pays additional costs. Canada forged a trade agreement with China, provoking threats of 100% tariffs from the U.S.-Canada purchased F-35 jets, only to hear threats aimed at decertifying those aircraft. At what point does Canada conclude that its relationship with the U.S. is less a partnership and more a cycle of ultimatums? When will other allies witness this pattern and reach the same conclusion? This situation becomes even more alarming when considering how Trump's criticisms in his Truth Social post were disconnected from the bridge itself. His complaints targeted Ontario's refusal to stock American alcoholic beverages, Canadian dairy tariffs, Canada's growing relationship with China, and then suddenly demanded compensation and half ownership of the bridge. The bridge, therefore, is being used solely as leverage for unrelated disputes. This approach is not diplomacy or partnership. It's a hostage tactic. Do what I want, or I will block what you need. And Canada is watching, Germany is watching, Japan is watching. U.S. allies worldwide are observing how the U.S. is willing to exploit every point of connection, every shared project, every moment of cooperation to extract concessions through threats. Such tactics cannot build or sustain alliances. They cannot foster lasting partnerships or effective leadership. Instead, they push allies to create alternatives that bypass dependence on the United States. Canada's recent response embodies this shift. 12 new trade deals in 6 months, $155 billion in counter tariffs, battery manufacturing plants within 10 miles of Detroit, and now a bridge Canada paid for, but which Trump threatens to block. What happens next? Either Trump backs down and the bridge opens, making his threats empty rhetoric, or he moves ahead to block it, harming Michigan's economy and confirming to every ally that the U.S. cannot be trusted as a reliable partner. In either case, Canada and other allies have learned a critical lesson. Do not build infrastructure or partnerships that depend on American cooperation if that cooperation can be weaponized. Instead, seek alternatives. Diversify. That is the real story here, not simply whether the bridge opens or remains closed, but what this threat signifies at its core. A bridge that Canada built and fully funded, a bridge that took 8 years to complete, was scheduled to open this month. Trump demanded half ownership and full compensation. Allies are watching closely, taking detailed notes about what this episode says about the future of international cooperation with the United States.